In 1982, fear and terror swept the country as 7 people mysteriously died in the Chicago area from taking the over-the-counter drug Tylenol.
And today, a new Netflix documentary is re-examining the events that led to widespread panic and copycat murders, including one in New York.
This is how the news covered the Tylenol murders back then.
It all started in the Chicago area where 7 people died after taking the painkiller, which had been laced with cyanide.
Good evening. American Roulette. That's what the Cook County Medical Examiner is calling the deadly game involving cyanide-loaded, extra-strength Tylenol. Investigators believe a madman is responsible for this drug version of Russian roulette, which has taken 7 lives so far. And at a news conference in Chicago, the Chicago Medical Examiner raised another possibility, factory-related.
This could be entirely a red herring. It could be entirely meaningless. And I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds in mentioning this. At a conference yesterday morning, I asked the 2 representatives from McNeil Laboratories if anywhere in the vicinity where Tylenol was being prepared, cyanide was present. The answer was yes. What did they use that for? I was told for quality control studies. I did not go into any detail. My next question simply was, at any time, did you test Tylenol for cyanide? The answer was yes, and it was always negative. Well, what comes to my mind is, why do you test for cyanide? You people take it from here.
The manufacturer, McNeil Consumer Products, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, insists the capsules were tampered with, and the company is offering $100,000 for information leading to the tamperer. As for the victims, all of them were from the Chicago area. The first victim, Mary Kellerman, was 12 years old. She had a cold and sore throat for 2 days before taking the drug. 27-year-old Adam Janis died a few hours later on Wednesday. His 25-year-old brother Stanley and his wife Teresa were upset when they came back from the hospital. They took some capsules from a Tylenol bottle, and they later died. This is 31-year-old Mary McFarland, who took the capsule at her job after feeling ill. 27-year-old Mary Reiner died in the same hospital she left a week ago after having her 4th child. And the latest victim to be discovered, flight attendant Paula Prince, was found in her Chicago apartment, an open bottle of extra-strength Tylenol near her body. In Chicago, Mayor Jane Byrne has banned the sale of all Tylenol, asking residents to turn in their bottles to the police stations where they're keeping track of the point of purchase and the lot numbers to try to track down any other contaminated batches. So far, 3 lots are involved. MC 2880, 191OMD, and the latest to be implicated, 1801MA.
So how did the poison get into the pills? Investigators' main theory comes under attack.
It's been a week and a half since 7 people in the Chicago area died after taking Tylenol capsules laced with cyanide. And since that time, investigators have been working on the premise known as the madman theory, that one or more persons poisoned the capsules and placed them on store shelves. Well, today that theory came under attack from the Cook County Medical Examiner. Dr. Robert Stein says the cyanide-laced capsules could have come from the distributing or manufacturing points, and he criticized the investigators for being too quick in ruling out leads. This after the latest lead turned out to be a dead end. With a report, Dave Browdy.
Once again, the leads checked out negative. Illinois Attorney General Tyrone Fainer told reporters his investigators have looked into a cyanide death in Wyoming and found it unrelated.
Objective facts we know about the Wyoming case right now would preclude that from having any part of this particular problem.
The chief investigator says there are about a dozen potential suspects in the murders here, of whom 4 seem more promising than the others. But he concedes no arrest is imminent.
We will solve the case. I believe that heart and soul. I'm sure of it in my own mind. That does not solve the case. I realize that. But I'm expressing the views of the agents involved. But I also said, and it is fact, that in cases like this, they do go on or can go on for a substantial period of time. or they can basically break in just a moment. Everything falls into place.
The investigators say they're somewhat surprised they haven't heard from whoever's responsible, and they're hoping the Tylenol terrorist will communicate soon. Without such communication, they admit it will take a lucky break to crack this case in a hurry. In Chicago, this is Dave Browdy.
Far from Chicago, a tip leads to an arrest in New York City when prime suspect James Lewis is apprehended after being recognized at a Manhattan public library.
Good evening. A man who tried hiding in a crowd and got away with it for a long time was finally spotted at a quiet table in a quiet place. James Lewis, the man the police in Chicago want to talk to in connection with the Tylenol murders. He is accused of trying to extort $1 million from Johnson & Johnson. Supposedly, he wrote them a letter saying there would be more death unless they gave him the money. Well, thanks to a sharp-eyed library clerk, the police in Chicago will get their chance to talk to him. John Miller reports.
For James Lewis, it was the end of a long journey. For hundreds of investigators in New York and Chicago, it was the end of an exhausting search. Lewis was arrested today when he was spotted by a librarian who had been shown a wanted poster. The search for Lewis first shifted to New York in October when a clerk at a rundown hotel recognized Lewis and his wife, Leanne, as the people to whom he had rented a second-floor room. The Lewises checked out the night before authorities were notified. After a day and a night of canvassing Midtown hotels, investigators assumed that because the heat was on, the Lewises had left town. Then, on November 21st, the search shifted back to New York. The FBI learned that Leanne Lewis had received a money order from her father through Western Union. A check of the videotapes recorded by a fixed camera at Western Union's Midtown office soon revealed a photo of Leanne receiving the check, and James Lewis, with his beard shaven off, leaning against a wall, waiting. Dismissing the theory that the Lewises had left town, the FBI reconcentrated their efforts in the Midtown area. Out-of-town newsstands were notified that Lewis might be buying the Chicago papers to keep abreast of the Tylenol investigation. Then, several days ago, a tip came in that Lewis was scanning the Chicago papers in the Manhattan branch of the public library.
A member of the public recognized the person and informed the police. And apparently the police took the information very seriously, and they did come back and with posters and ask our staff members to be on the alert for persons of this description. And today, one of the library staff members thought that a person resembled the description and did alert the number that was given to them, the police or FBI number.
After Lewis was apprehended, 2 other FBI agents were posted near the door to scan people coming in and out of the library, hoping that Lewis's wife might not have heard of the capture and come there to meet him. James Lewis was charged with violation of the Hobbs Act, federal charge of extortion. His wife, on the other hand, was only charged with misuse of a Social Security card. Now that James Lewis is in custody, officials at the FBI are hoping that his wife, Leanne, will come in and surrender. John Miller, Channel 5 News.
Good evening. The Tylenol murders in Chicago may never be solved. The desperately twisted mind behind it may never be discovered, but at least a chapter in the case appears to be closed. The police did pick up a man accused of trying to make money off those murders, James Lewis, accused of extortion. Now the police in Chicago have his wife. She turned herself in. John Miller reports.
Leanne Lewis apparently heard of her husband's capture on the news. She telephoned her parents in the Chicago area and asked for advice. Within hours, she was told to wait in the lobby of the Gramercy Park Hotel on Lower Lexington Avenue. She was met there by New York lawyer Frank Lopez.
Met here at 10 o'clock. I had already made provisions for a room at the UN Plaza, and she was housed there at the UN Plaza. I brought her up to her room, and I asked her to remain in her room, not to make any phone calls, that we would be in communication with her as to when we'd pick her up in the morning. Earlier this morning, sometime around 7:30, 8 o'clock, around there, we picked her up at the UN Plaza and made her travel plans and arrangements for the return to Chicago.
James Lewis was captured yesterday when an alert clerk at the Mid-Manhattan branch of the public library recognized him from an FBI wanted poster. Agents who took Lewis into custody said that he was not talking and that they found nothing, not a receipt, not a hotel key, nothing to indicate where he or his wife had been. Lopez, who spent time last night with Lewis's wife, described her as tired of running.
Looked a little bit tired, somewhat apprehensive, but she was concerned primarily for her husband. She wasn't concerned about herself. She wasn't even worried about herself. She was concerned for her husband and his well-being, and that was chiefly her conversation. She wanted me to see him as soon as possible.
Diane Lewis is only charged with misuse of a Social Security card. Her husband, on the other hand, is charged with extortion. Now she's in the hands of Chicago authorities. Her husband is still here in New York, being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. He'll be back in court on December 23rd for a removal hearing to face those charges in Chicago. John Miller, Channel 5 News.
Just a few years later, another death involving cyanide in Tylenol. This time, it happened in New York.
Well, that Tylenol scare is a murder case now, and officials think a local case, a young woman dying in Yonkers after taking some Tylenol. We know now that cyanide was in those capsules, and we know it had to be added within the last 10 days or so. And so far, no other bottles of the painkiller have been found to be tampered with. Westchester officials held a news conference today, and Pablo Guzman was there.
The one hard piece of information which came out of today's press conference was the confirmation of the presence of potassium cyanide in 3 of the remaining capsules in the bottle which Diane Ellsworth used. Now, generally speaking, potassium cyanide has a life of 8 to 10 days before it would begin eating its way through the capsule. That seems to rule out the possibility that the poison was introduced at the place where it was manufactured, because this particular batch of Tylenol was made in August of 1985.
The toxicologist who examined the tissues which we routinely send on cases like this had this sudden smell of so-called bitter almonds. Interestingly, one is inherited with an ability to smell this, we're told, so that everybody can't smell that aroma.
That smell of bitter almonds that Dr. Highland is referring to is a telltale sign of potassium cyanide. Westchester County's chief medical examiner said potassium cyanide is difficult to purchase. It is used mainly as an industrial solvent. News that Diana Ellsworth was poisoned by cyanide found in a Tylenol capsule immediately provoked thoughts of the scare of 1982, when 7 people in the Chicago area were poisoned by tampered Tylenol.
The Illinois Attorney General is blunt. He says, we want to find the madman responsible for this sick behavior.
2 men were arrested in separate developments following that scare. One for writing an extortion note, the other for killing a man he thought steered police to a store where he worked, where police found cyanide, guns, and a book on how to kill. But no one was ever convicted for the original Tylenol poisonings.
Do you have any results yet from the test of the other Tylenol at that store?
The thing that I can tell you at this point in time is that what the FDA has indicated to us, and remember, it's not the in-depth analysis that you just heard, but the cursory examination of the other capsules from the Bronxville store revealed no obvious contamination of any of the capsules.
At the time of Ms. Ellsworth's death, she and her boyfriend were staying at his mother's house. When the mother learned of Diane's death, she took one of those Tylenol capsules. Fortunately, it didn't contain the potassium cyanide. At this time, the police say that they are pursuing this as a murder investigation. They have no suspects. From Westchester County, I'm Pablo Guzman, Channel 5 News.
Back in 1982, in response to the tampering incidents, the makers of Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, made major changes to how they packaged their pills.
And this new packaging helped restore public trust and became a standard in other over-the-counter medicines.
If you took all of the mayors of this country and put together the composite of the type of a corporate neighbor they'd like to have, I think it would be a mirror image of Johnson & Johnson.
Johnson & Johnson's involvement with the town of New Brunswick goes far beyond its corporate headquarters, the largest office tower in a newly revitalized downtown. Across the street, there's a new hotel, also built largely by the company. It's all part of a process that has transformed New Brunswick and given the company an enviable image, despite high unemployment just blocks from the huge tower.
Basically, in about the last 12 years, Johnson & Johnson's been involved in the revitalization program.
When you're talking to people in the community, did they talk a lot about Tylenol?
Of course there's apprehension, a great deal of apprehension about what's going to be the company's policy from here on.
This has been a very severe crisis for us, of which we're handling. But it's not the only crisis we've had. It's certainly not going to be the last one, and it's not going to deter us from, again, going back to our basic fundamental principles that we are going to do what we believe is right to do when it should be done.
There was a time when the name Johnson & Johnson was reassurance itself. It brought up images of baby shampoo, the one with no more tears, baby powder, Band-Aids, the kind of products everyone had confidence in.
But now when you see the name Johnson & Johnson, chances are you think of Tylenol capsules, the ones with the cyanide in them. And that shows you just how fragile a corporate image really is.
And now reintroducing Tylenol capsules, safety sealed 3 ways.
Back in 1982, Johnson & Johnson moved quickly to restore its badly damaged image with ads touting the safety of its Tylenol capsules in their new packages.
If you are a Tylenol capsule user, you should know about extra-strength Tylenol caplets.
Just this week, the company has again begun advertising Tylenol on television. The new ads for caplets, a solid form of the same medicine that used to come in capsules, never mention the tampering issue.
Caplets deliver all the pain relief you've come to expect from extra-strength Tylenol.
The advertising campaign to restore sales of the extremely popular painkiller will be expensive. And perhaps the most sensitive question we will ask tonight is whether Johnson & Johnson brought much of that expense on itself by continuing to market capsules identical to those poisoned in Chicago.
It was a businessman's risk. I think with the technology that existed at that time, it was a wise decision to try to remarket the brand. At that point, they only had 2 dosage forms, the capsule and the tablet, and the capsule was clearly the fastest growing component.
Analysts at Paine-Webber suggest only hindsight indicates that Johnson & Johnson made a bad decision in taking that risk. But others say the company knew Tylenol was vulnerable even before the Chicago incidents, and that J&J used skillful public relations to divert attention from the issue.
What we saw last time was that PR was able to influence the press to cover largely the story of what a responsible company it was, how responsible the chairman was. What we're seeing now is that the press is saying, wait a minute, this happened twice. If there is so much responsible activity occurring, why are people dying? And the press is looking at the tamper-resistant packaging and saying it was never a solution to the problem.
Jeff and Marie Bliscoe have written extensively on public relations techniques. They point to documents like these from Johnson & Johnson's consultant PR firm, Burson Marsteller. The internal documents discuss how to keep the focus on new products and how to renew confidence in Johnson & Johnson, while at the same time avoiding questions about why there had been no protective packaging of capsules before the 1982 Chicago incidents.
Johnson & Johnson's strategy in this now is to say, okay, the capsule was bad, we made a mistake, we take the responsibility, we take the blame, here's our savior, you know, the caplets.
We feel the company can no longer guarantee the safety of capsules to a degree consistent with Johnson & Johnson's standards of responsibility to its consumers.
It is important to make clear that a tamper-proof package is not possible.
That was back in 1982. The drug companies and the federal government realized they had a big problem on their hands. They met together and decided that each drug company would have to adopt at least one of 11 security measures. Those measures would make boxes tamper-resistant, but would leave the capsules alone. Johnson & Johnson went farther than any other company, adopting 3 of the 11 security measures. But even that proved not to be enough. The question was raised, why didn't the federal government require that all capsules themselves be tamper-proofed? Or, failing that, ban the capsule?
As a form of medication, highly safe, and FDA doesn't believe that at this time that it's anything other than premature to make any decision against capsules.
I think that one has to recognize that the overall safety record over a long period of time is extremely high, and you're talking about 1 in 100 billion. So that even that, however, we're prepared to go out and to make considerable investments, and we have been, in trying to improve the whole process.
No drug company with which we spoke would directly criticize Johnson & Johnson for not doing something to make capsules harder to open. The other companies simply say they have done so and consider their own capsules safe. You market capsules. Are they safe?
Yes.
Warner Lambert's snap-together process, called Connie Snap Supra, is just one of 7 capsule sealing technologies either on the market or in final stages of development. Panadol, a relatively recent competitor for Tylenol, uses what's called the Sonoseal. An S is embossed in the capsule, making it difficult, if not impossible, to open without damaging the shell. Drug companies have long used these so-called soft capsules for vitamin products. They are also extremely hard to open without leaving holes. Other manufacturers post-82 went to capsules. For example, one of your competitors, I guess Panadol, individually seals each capsule.
Yes.
With a crimp.
Yes.
Did you find that impractical, or why did you not do that?
Well, that's, again, in the review of the technology, which I mentioned, That's a technology that we've been following since Chicago. We have never felt that the technology had reached the point where it was up to the quality standards of our company.
In a statement, Johnson & Johnson reiterated it considers the Sonaseal to cause leakage. Other sealed capsules, the company says, can be taken apart without destroying the capsule, therefore representing no improvement over Tylenol's old form. The company representatives were questioned about this, though not too hard, at a recent hearing of the Senate Labor and Human Resources Committee.
We found that the sealing rate in our tests after shipping, after delivery, was not up to a standard which we felt we had to meet.
But our sources say one of the biggest reasons behind Johnson & Johnson's rejection of sealing technology is that hardware has not been available to produce enough sealed capsules to meet the huge demand for Tylenol, which even after the Chicago poisonings recovered to once again become the nation's largest over-the-counter painkiller. Thus, while competitors marketed or moved towards sealed capsules, Johnson & Johnson triple-sealed its packages, leaving the capsules themselves alone.
I'm sure none of the other companies in the business ever hoped that Johnson & Johnson would again have this problem. But the one thing they did do was ensure that that problem would not happen to them.
Not until after the Ellsworth poisoning did Johnson & Johnson do what some felt it should have the first time, dumping the capsule.
Johnson & Johnson will no longer manufacture or sell any capsule products made directly available to the consumer.
The technology we've chosen and the approach that the industry has chosen is not tamper-proofness, but tamper evidence. Not to make it harder to open for anybody, legitimate user or the tamperer, but to make it as difficult as possible to open without there being some trace left behind or evidence left behind that the next consumer could notice.
FDA stated that it's premature at this time to ban capsules. We are looking at it to determine what the right approach is, but we do not feel, based on everything that we had and in fact the meetings that I held, that any regulatory action should be done.
Local governments have not been so sure. In Chicago, immediately after the Tylenol poisonings of 1982, the city council met and passed the first ordinance requiring tamper-proof packaging on over-the-counter drugs sold in that city. Now in Westchester County, the scene of the latest Tylenol death, the move is to ban over-the-counter capsules throughout the state.
Capsules are essentially, in the over-the-counter form, a convenience and a habit. And it seems to us that there is no real reason to extend a convenience and a habit when the cost is even one innocent life.
My belief is that the drug industry, and I won't be as kind to them as Assemblyman Brodsky was, that they learned nothing from the 1982 Tylenol incident, that they overrode Johnson & Johnson when they tried to take capsules off the market by competitiveness and coming in under them and trying to sell more of their own products in capsule form. So since they have learned nothing, that this is necessary. Whether this would have prevented the unfortunate death of this young woman, I won't even speculate on that, but certainly some legislation is necessary, and I congratulate the sponsors of this bill.
I know of no way of ensuring that a capsule will be safe.
Neither does Johnson & Johnson.
No.
Yet there are still capsules on the market.
Capsules manufactured by other companies, you know.
Should they get out of the business of manufacturing capsules?
It would only be my personal opinion, yes.
James Lewis, a suspect in the case, died in 2023 without ever being charged with murder. He maintained his innocence. The case remains unsolved.
And that was the news then.